Picture it. A cold morning 40,000 years ago. A plain of frozen grass that runs all the way to the edge of the world. A gray sky. A hard wind. Your own breath hanging in the air in front of your face. Snow in the hollows. Frost on every blade of grass. And you, crouched low behind a ridge of stone, holding a wooden spear tipped with a sliver of sharp flint, not moving, barely breathing. Because out on the plain in front of you there are giants. A whole herd of them. Mountains of muscle and shaggy brown hair, each one taller than 3 men standing on each other's shoulders. Curved ivory tusks longer than your whole body. Feet the size of tree stumps. A trunk that can smell you from half a mile away. Woolly mammoths. 6 tons of animal each. Moving slowly across the frozen grass, breathing out clouds of steam. And here's the thing you need to understand. In your world, this is normal. The mammoth is not a monster in a story. It is Tuesday. Because the world you were born into is not the calm, tame, half-empty world that we live in today. It is a world absolutely crawling with giants. The strangest, largest, most terrifying collection of beasts this planet has ever known. And you, a soft little human with a stick, have to survive in the middle of all of them. So let me take you into that lost world. Let me show you the monsters your ancestors actually lived beside, the ones with claws and tusks and teeth the length of your hand. And then let me ask you the uncomfortable question that scientists still argue about today. Because every single one of those giants is gone now, all of them, and the #1 suspect in their disappearance is you. Let's meet the giants first. Start with the cold north, the mammoth steppe, a vast frozen grassland that once stretched from Europe all the way across Asia. This is the kingdom of the woolly mammoth, but it is far from empty. There is the woolly rhinoceros, 2 tons of bad temper with a horn on its face nearly a meter long. There is the cave bear, bigger than any bear alive today, that slept in the same caves your people wanted to sleep in. There is the cave lion, larger than an African lion, pale and silent in the snow. And there is the Irish elk. A deer, technically, carrying a rack of antlers 12 feet across, wider than a car on top of its head. Now travel south and back in time, and it gets stranger. In the Americas, there was a ground sloth called Megatherium. And forget the slow little sloth hanging in a tree. This thing stood as tall as an elephant, weighed 4 tons, and could rear up on its hind legs to pull down whole trees with claws like scythes. There was the glyptodon, a relative of the armadillo the size and shape of a small car, covered in a solid dome of bony armor, with a spiked club for a tail. There was the short-faced bear, which may be the largest meat-eating land mammal that ever lived, standing over 3.5 meters tall on its hind legs, tall enough to look a giraffe in the eye. And these were not rare, exotic exceptions. They were the ordinary wildlife. A single walk across Ice Age America might show you a mastodon stripping the branches off a spruce tree, a herd of wild horses and camels, yes, camels in America, a giant beaver the size of a black bear gnawing at the waterline, and a flock of teratorns, vultures with a wingspan of nearly 4 meters, circling overhead waiting for something to die. Europe had the aurochs, a wild bull far bigger than any farm cow, and great herds of giant deer. This was a planet running at a scale we can barely picture today, as if every landscape on Earth were an African savanna turned all the way up and then pushed further still. And then there is Australia, which is the strangest of all. Australia had Diprotodon, a wombat the size of a rhinoceros. It had Procoptodon, a short-faced kangaroo 2 meters tall that could not hop so much as stride, reaching up into the trees with a single giant claw on each hand. It had Megalania, a monitor lizard 5, maybe 7 meters long, a land-going dragon with serrated teeth. It had Genyornis, a flightless bird twice the weight of an ostrich. And it had Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion, with the strongest bite of any mammal its size and a thumb claw like a switchblade. And do not make the mistake of thinking of yourself as the hunter in this world. Just as often, you were the meat. The sabre-toothed cat, Smilodon, was built like a bear-sized ambush machine, with 2 curved canine teeth as long as your hand, made for driving down into the throat of something enormous. Packs of dire wolves, heavier and stronger than any wolf alive today, ran the open plains. The American lion stalked the grasslands, and the giant short-faced bear may have been fast enough to run down a horse. For a small, slow human caught alone in the open at dusk, every one of these was a death sentence with legs. Your ancestors did not begin at the top of this world. They clawed their way up into it. This is the planet ancient humans walked out into. Not a peaceful Eden. A monster movie. Everywhere they went, the land was ruled by animals that could kill them without noticing. Scientists have a name for these vanished giants. They call them the megafauna, the big animals. And for most of the last 2.5 million years, they ruled the earth. So how on earth did a slow, soft, hairless little animal, no claws, no fangs, no fur, no armor, survive in a world like that? And not just survive. Win. The answer is the same handful of things it always is. Fire, to keep the big cats and the bears out of the dark. The group, because 30 humans with spears are a very different problem than one. And above all, the mind, because your ancestors did not fight the giants with muscle. They fought them with plans. Picture one of those plans. A single mammoth, old and slow, cut off from the rest of the herd. A dozen hunters spread out around it in the snow, low and patient, reading the animal, waiting. One darts in and jabs a spear into its flank and dances back before the trunk can find him. Then another from the other side, then another. It is not a battle. It is a slow, bloody wearing down, a thing of nerve and timing and terrible patience. Hour after hour until the giant finally sinks into the red snow and the whole band falls on it before its heart has even stopped. One kill like this could feed a family through the deepest weeks of winter. Meat and fat and hide for shelter and bone and ivory for 100 tools. A single mammoth was a moving warehouse of everything a human needed to stay alive, which is exactly why it was worth dying for. They used the land itself as a weapon. Picture a herd of horses, or bison, or even mammoths, and a line of humans behind them, shouting, waving fire, driving them into a panic, and steering that panic toward the edge of a cliff. The animals at the front try to stop. The animals behind push them over. In a single afternoon, a band could kill more meat than they could eat in a month. We have found these places, the bottoms of cliffs stacked with the bones of hundreds of animals, killed in drive after drive, century after century. At one cliff in North America, hunters used the same killing place for nearly 6,000 years. So many animals were stampeded over its edge that the bed of shattered bone beneath it lies piled more than 10 meters deep. They built traps and pitfalls. They tipped their spears with beautiful razor-edged stone points, and later invented the spear thrower. A simple lever of wood and bone that turned a human arm into a catapult and sent a spear through the ribs of a mammoth from 30 paces. And when the killing was done, they used everything. In the treeless cold of the Ice Age, on the plains of what is now Ukraine, archaeologists have found whole huts built out of mammoth bones. Walls of jaws and skulls, roofs held up by tusks. People lived inside the giants they killed, and they did something no other predator has ever done. They drew them. Deep in the caves of Europe, in Chauvet, in Lascaux, by the light of a flickering lamp, ancient artists covered the walls with the animals of their world. Herds of horses, charging rhinos, prides of lions, and mammoths again and again, painted in charcoal and red ochre 30,000 years ago, so alive they almost move in the firelight. These are not just pictures. They are the oldest portraits we have. A lost world drawn from life by the humans who lived in it. And you can feel in those paintings that these animals were never just food. They were awe, and terror and something close to worship. When the only lights in the whole world are your fire and the moon, and the darkness beyond the firelight is full of things that can crush you or swallow you whole, the giants become the gods and the demons of the imagination. Every people that lived among them wove them into stories. The great beast, the thunder walker, the thing in the dark. We have been telling monster stories for as long as we have been human. And for almost all of that time, the monsters were real, and they were standing just outside the ring of the fire. So, for tens of thousands of years, humans and giants shared the earth. Uneasily, dangerously. But they shared it. And then, one by one, the giants started to vanish. And here is the part that makes scientists nervous. Because when you lay out a map of the world, and you mark the date that humans first arrived on each landmass, and then you mark the date the giant animals disappeared, those two dates keep landing right on top of each other. Look at Australia. Humans first stepped onto that continent somewhere around 50,000 years ago. And within a few thousand years of their arrival, almost every one of those strange Australian giants, the giant wombat, the giant kangaroo, the marsupial lion, the dragon, the giant bird, was simply gone. 90% of Australia's large animals wiped off the map in a geological blink. Now look at the Americas. Human hunters spread south through North and South America around 15,000 years ago. And again, within a couple of thousand years, the mammoths, the mastodons, the giant sloths, the glyptodons, the sabre-toothed cats, the short-faced bears, the American lions, the giant beavers the size of bears. Gone. Something like 3/4 of the big animals in the Americas vanished, right around the time the first people arrived and spread. Everywhere humans went, the giants died. That is the pattern. And it is the reason so many scientists point the finger squarely at us. They even have a grim name for it. The overkill hypothesis. The idea that our ancestors, armed with fire and spears and teamwork and clever minds, spread across the planet like a slow wave of extinction and hunted the biggest animals on Earth into oblivion. But, and this matters, not everyone agrees. Because there is another suspect standing right next to us. The climate. Because this was the Ice Age, and the Ice Age was ending. The great glaciers were melting. Temperatures were swinging. The mammoth steppe, that vast frozen grassland, was turning into wet forest and bog, and a mammoth cannot eat a forest. Whole worlds of habitat were shifting and disappearing. Maybe, the argument goes, the giants were not murdered. Maybe the ground simply moved out from under them, and the confused cornered survivors finally gave out. It is a good argument, but it has one enormous problem. And that problem is Africa. Because Africa still has its giants. Elephants, rhinos, hippos, giraffes, lions, Cape buffalo. The last great herds of megafauna left on Earth are almost all in Africa. And that is not a coincidence. Africa is where humans evolved. The animals there grew up with us over millions of years, watching this strange little predator slowly get smarter and deadlier. They learned the hard way to fear us. They evolved their caution alongside our cleverness. But everywhere else, in Australia, in the Americas, in the frozen North, the giants had never seen a human before. They had no fear of us at all. Imagine an animal the size of a car that has never in its entire evolutionary history been hunted, meeting a pack of humans with spears for the very first time. It doesn't run. It doesn't know it should. And that, the overkill scientists argue, is the difference between the giant that survived in Africa and the giant that died everywhere else. Not the weather. Us. If you want to watch the whole thing happen in fast forward, look at New Zealand. Those islands stayed completely empty of people until astonishingly recently. Only about 700 years ago. And they belong to the moa, giant flightless birds. The tallest standing nearly 3.5 meters, that had never in their history met a predator walking on two legs. When the first people stepped ashore, the moa had no fear and nowhere to hide. Within roughly 100 years, a single long human lifetime, every last species of moa was gone, hunted out, their bones and eggshells heaped in cooking sites all along the coast. And the giant Haast's eagle, the largest eagle that ever flew, which had lived entirely by hunting the moa, starved into extinction right behind them. No ice age, no shifting climate, just people and hunger and birds that never learned to run. And it kept happening, again and again, wherever humans reached a new shore for the very first time. The giant lemurs of Madagascar, some as heavy as a gorilla, and the elephant bird, a flightless monster that laid an egg the size of a rugby ball, vanished within a few centuries of people landing on the island. Dwarf elephants and giant tortoises blinked out on one Mediterranean island after another as the boats arrived. The story has the same shape every single time. A land full of huge, fearless, slow-breeding animals living in peace for millions of years. And then a single human footprint on the beach, and, not long after, silence. And the climate has a second problem too. This same ice age had ended before, many times. The world had warmed and cooled and warmed again for 2.5 million years, and the giants had ridden out every single swing. They had survived dozens of these. So why did they die during this one particular thaw? The exact thaw that also happened to have a new spear-throwing, fire-carrying super predator loose on every continent for the first time. The honest answer, the one most scientists now land on, is that it was probably both. A 1-2 punch, a changing climate that put the giants under stress and squeezed their habitats, and then humans arriving into that weakened world and finishing the job. The climate loaded the gun, but it really does look like we pulled the trigger, and we can actually see the killing if we know where to look. In the Americas, archaeologists have found the elegant stone spear points of the first hunters, Clovis points, lodged directly between the ribs of mammoths and mastodons at ancient kill sites. We find the cut marks their stone blades left on giant bones. And there is an even stranger clue, buried in the mud of ancient lakes. A certain fungus called sporomiella only grows in the dung of large plant eaters, so the more giant animals there are on a landscape, the more of its spores end up in the mud. And in core after core, on continent after continent, you can watch those spores collapse towards zero right around the time humans show up. A graph of the giants disappearing, written in fungus and mud. Now, before you feel too guilty, remember how slow this was. No ancient human woke up planning to end a species. Each band just did what every animal does. They fed themselves and their children. A cliff drive here, a mammoth there, a clutch of giant bird eggs eaten before they could hatch. Any one of those is nothing. But a slow-breeding giant that has a single calf every few years cannot absorb even a small, steady loss forever. Multiply one extra kill a year by a few thousand years, across a whole growing human population, and the arithmetic quietly becomes an apocalypse. Nobody meant to do it. It happened anyway. That may be the most unsettling part of all. And some of the giants held on, right at the edges, for a shockingly long time. On a tiny, remote scrap of land called Wrangel Island in the freezing Arctic Ocean, a last population of woolly mammoths survived, cut off, forgotten, until around 4,000 years ago. Stop and let that sink in. The Egyptians had already built the Great Pyramids. Writing existed. Cities existed. And out on that lonely island, real, living, breathing woolly mammoths were still walking around. They didn't belong to some impossibly distant age. They were still here, just out of sight, almost close enough to touch. And then they weren't. and with them went the last of a world that had lasted for 2.5 million years. Think about what we actually lost. Not just a few big animals, an entire scale of life. For almost the whole human story, our ancestors shared the planet with creatures that made an elephant look modest. And today, the elephant is about the biggest land animal we have left, and even it is hanging on by a thread. We are the first humans in history to live in a small world. A quiet world. A world where you can walk across an entire continent and never once feel that ancient electric fear of something enormous moving in the dark. We think of that emptiness as normal. It is not normal. It is brand new, and we made it. You have never once in your life had to fear a truly enormous animal. Neither had your parents or their parents before them. That safety feels like the natural order of things. Just how the world is. But stretch the human story out to its full, staggering length, and our few thousand quiet years are the strange part. A brief, calm epilogue tacked onto 100,000 years spent sharing the ground with monsters. We did not inherit an empty planet. We emptied it. Which brings us to a strange thought at the end of all this. Right now, in laboratories, there are scientists trying to bring the woolly mammoth back, reading its DNA out of frozen tusks and bones, trying to stitch a giant back together and let it walk the northern plains again. We spent tens of thousands of years erasing the giants from the earth, and now, for the first time, we are wondering whether we could undo it. Maybe we will. Maybe the mammoth will breathe cold air again one day. But it will never quite be the world your ancestors knew. That wild, crowded, dangerous planet where every horizon might hold a monster, and a soft little animal with a sharpened stick had to be brave and clever and lucky just to make it to morning. That animal won. It won so completely that it inherited an empty world and forgot the giants had ever been there at all. But they were there, painted on the cave walls, buried in the mud, written in your own history. For 40,000 years, your ancestors looked up at the largest animals that ever lived and lived to tell the story. You are the proof that they did.